In 1935, a group of Chinese dissidents embark on an exhausting and dangerous long march. Their friends have been ousted from ruling positions, tortured and killed by the ruling Nationalist Party. They are looking to rebuild their red area from which they will fight for their cause, while Nationalist leader Chiang Kai-Shek still plans to eradicate them. Led by Chairman Mao Zedong, they are the Chinese Communists, and they are hungry for power. Welcome to Between Two Wars, a chronological summary of the interwar years, covering all facets of life, the uncertainty, hedonism, and euphoria, and ultimately humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Neidell. The last time we covered China in a 1926 episode, Chiang Kai-Shek had just seized control of the Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, and his rival Wang Jingwei was forced into exile. China was far from unified, though Chiang was on the brink of finally pushing north to conquer the northern warlords. But his government in the south still faced opposition from within. So, that is where we left off. Now, the idea of a unified China is widely supported in many circles. The Kuomintang, the Chinese Communists, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, the influential warlord Feng Yuxiang all support the unification of China. Okay. In 1926, Chinese nationalism is not necessarily left-wing nor right-wing, but rather a shared ideal supported by a multitude of ideological movements and individuals. Though Chiang had gained control of the Kuomintang and purged the communist elements from its leadership, he still enjoys the support of both Stalin and Feng Yuxiang. Chiang is also careful to not alienate the Chinese communists in general. After assuming power, he quickly lifts martial law, releases communist prisoners, and forbids right-wing demonstrations. The Kuomintang Nationalist Army, the NRA, then does well from the start of the Northern Expedition, capturing Nanjing and Shanghai by April 1927. The NRA, though, is not centrally organized and is made out of loosely connected alliances and military groups, all with their own interests. Other than a common national goal, the desire to gain personal glory and increase power over other military groups within the NRA are big motivators for those in command of the nationalist armies. With a lack of central control then, the nationalists, the communists, the Soviets all attempt to control the expedition. They grab every chance they can to boost their own position. And while the Northern Expedition proves to be, against the expectations of many, a success, the internal struggle only worsens. This all negatively affects the authority of Chiang Kai-Shek as commander-in-chief of the NRA, as other military figures gain military prestige and power. So, even if much of China is now under Kuomintang control, it is not at all clear who will come out on top. The KMT, Kuomintang, at this time is not only divided into factions of power-hungry militants, it is also far from homogeneous when it comes to their ideology. And although the communists of the CCP have lost influence in the KMT leadership, they are still more or less a part of the Kuomintang. Now, the CCP, that's the Chinese Communist Party, now start searching for ways to regain influence over the KMT and expand their influence in China. But the CCP leaders are divided among themselves too. Borodin, Stalin's advisor to the KMT, wants to assert control over KMT institutions. Communist Party founder and chairman Chen Duxiu does not agree and believes that the CCP should organize and arm radical labor and peasant movements. In the meantime, Chen wants to provoke a division between the left wing of the KMT, with among others Wang Jingwei, who has returned from exile, and the right wing of the KMT, including Chiang Kai-Shek, to avoid the KMT from ever uniting against the CCP, right? Unfortunately for Duxiu, that is precisely what happens. Before I go there, let me quickly explain why the CCP is so anxious not to offend the Kuomintang too much. I mean, the nationalists don't really envision a communist revolution in China, right? Well, yes and no. The KMT is first and foremost a nationalistic revolutionary movement, something they share with the communists. In that sense, even Chiang Kai-Shek sees himself as revolutionary, something he also played on to get support from the Soviet Union. But more importantly, the CCP is nowhere near the military power that the Kuomintang with the National Revolutionary Army is. Armed conflict with them is impossible. Thus, Chen Duxiu starts building up an armed wing of the CCP. He asks the Soviets to support him with military supplies, but the Soviets deny this in fear of an armed conflict between the two movements. The main goal for the Soviets at this point is still to unify China. But support or no support, something is brewing in the Chinese countryside. Throughout China, most notably in Hunan province and Shanghai, peasants are uniting and calling for land reforms. As this peasant movement forms, a man named Mao Zedong is assigned to write a report on it for the Kuomintang government. Mao, already active in the communist movement, reports that the poor peasants are the vanguard of the revolution, and the peasant movement grows, and it grows quickly. By March 1927, over 5 million members have joined the Hunan Provincial Peasant Association, which arms peasants and seizes land from large property owners. This becomes a gruesome and violent peasant rebellion fought against local militias paid by local elites. Even Mao acknowledges that this could have really adverse effects on the CCP's goals, as he writes that, if assassinations continue to occur without end, a violent end would ensue should there be a military setback. And Mao's assessment proves to be on point. The violence cannot be contained. An uprising in Shanghai turns into total chaos. Communist supporters kill whomever they suspect supports the nationalist authorities, while police forces crack down on the insurgents. Wang Jingwei can do nothing to stem the tide, and the CCP and the KMT end up turning on each other. Okay, the backstory to all of this is much more complicated than I just explained, but that is for another time and place. Anyhow, power games played by Kuomintang, Communist Party, the Peasants' Movement, the Shanghai Revolt, and the tensions that have been building up for the better part of the 1920s lead to an all-out eruption of violence. On April 12, 1927, the Guangxi forces, with the approval of Chiang Kai-Shek, massacre the communists in Shanghai in an effort to end the revolt. This white terror spreads through China as communists are murdered on the streets and in their homes. Others are imprisoned and tortured. Thousands of people lose their lives. Forced to flee the cities under control of the KMT, the communists seek refuge in the countryside. As Chiang's forces clear their territory, the government and the party of communists, any other dissidents are silenced or are subtly advised to go abroad for a vacation. With the communists driven from power and the United Front just a memory of more peaceful times, Chiang still finishes his northern expedition in 1928, from which point he's a lot closer to being the leader of a unified China. But there are still many forces at play pushing and pulling Chiang in different directions. So, during the next years, he has his hands full with a bunch of remaining warlords and opposition from within his own party, which brings us to 1934. The Chinese Communist Party barely survived the 1927 purges and have lost virtually all their power in the Chinese cities. They have instead been driven to rural areas where the KMT doesn't have as much influence and where communist sympathetic peasants are in charge. And once the Nationalists took up arms against the communists, this was no longer just a political struggle for power. Armed conflict seems to be the only way out for both sides. The Workers' and Peasants' Red Army of China, or just the Red Army, was set up in 1927, shortly after the purges, because this new phase of the situation requires an army. This is civil war. The communists continue organizing their movement in the rural Jiangxi province throughout the late 20s and early 1930s in relative peace, while Chiang is still held up with other issues. In 1931, the Jiangxi Fujian Soviet, known practically as the Chinese Soviet Republic, is founded by General Zhu De and Mao Zedong, who has by now risen through the ranks and functions as the chairman and prime minister of the Chinese Soviet Republic. It's a state within a state, inside Chiang Kai-Shek and the Kuomintang's Republic of China. Now, Chiang just can't seem to get to grips with the vast, disparate countryside and its peasantry. But this is where Mao excels. He sees this as a people's war. The Red Army, though inferior in numbers, will be able to hold out in rural areas with the support of the people. The communists don't need big fortified cities. Instead, they will lure Chiang's armies to the countryside, stretching the Nationalist army's supply lines. That is what Mao calls mobile warfare. As opposed to guerrilla warfare, mobile warfare is less about sabotaging and making small-scale attacks. Instead, it's about maintaining a relatively sizable army, but never going head-on against a numerically and technologically superior army where you know the odds are against you. You only hit them, or parts of them, and you know for a fact that you will win the encounter. So Mao and the communists, with the general support of the people, are relatively secure in the Jiangxi province. Until now in 1934. Chiang and the national government have by now introduced peace preservation forces to consolidate his military power throughout the entirety of China. Not just to battle communists, but also the large number of bandits and remnants of insurgent warlord factions. The Nanchang headquarters is established to oversee local governments and tries to extend its influence through the construction of irrigation networks, infrastructure, and the creation of food supplies. At the same time, the NRA launches several suppression campaigns to defeat the communists. Despite some setbacks in 1933, including the Nationalist Fujian Rebellion, Nationalist forces launched the 4th and 5th campaigns to eradicate the communists in the Jiangxi Soviet in 1934. In the anti-communist annihilation campaign, over 1 million men are mobilized. They are equipped with heavy artillery and an air force, things the communists don't have. But communists don't do massive battles, remember? They're all about mobility and evasion. The NRA's answer to Mao's mobile warfare is called fortism, and it is all about caution and patience. A series of interconnected fortifications is built. A corridor of fortified blockhouses and machine gun outposts surrounding the Red area disrupt communist supply lines and dissuade the Red Army from seeking confrontation. Additionally, improved infrastructure allows for a better supply chain and makes a long defensive offensive sustainable, right? So slowly but steadily, those fortifications will be moved closer and closer to the center of the communist territory, effectively eliminating all communist resistance. Well, the communists panic and decide that their mobile or even guerrilla warfare won't stand a chance against the superior defensive tactics of the NRA. They take a huge gamble. They go with old-fashioned positional warfare. In other words, they choose to face the Nationalists head-on. In a decisive battle at Guangchang, the northern gate of the Jiangxi province, the Nationalist army crushes 9 communist divisions, forcing their way into Jiangxi. The communists are driven from the province, and local Guomindang governments are set up under oversight of the Nanchang headquarters. So Chiang has won it. He has consolidated his power, and his principal rival is now driven from his new national China. Or, well, yes, Mao and the communists have lost their Jiangxi Soviet, the basis for their Communist Republic of China, but Mao wouldn't really be Mao if he hadn't applied his strategy of mobile warfare to the nationalist push. The communists might have been defeated, but they are not destroyed. In October 1934, Mao's evacuation from Jiangxi province begins. The communists head north, avoiding any big confrontation with the NRA. Slowly, but steadily, throughout 1934 and 1935, hundreds of thousands of communist soldiers, men, women, and children, make their way to an enclave in the northeast of Jiangxi province. This will become known as the Long March, although it is more accurately described as a series of smaller marches made by multiple groups with many stops in between. Anyhow, Mao would use the Long March to build up and eternalize his own character and the communist movement to reach legendary proportions throughout his life. The Long March, though, is a costly undertaking, which does not lead to immediate stability by any means. Thousands die on the way of starvation or at the hands of locals, nationalist soldiers, or their sympathizers. At the same time, The communist armies plunder and murder anyone who stands in their way. And though the communists have managed to flee the direct control of Chiang Kai-Shek's Kuomintang government in Nanking, Chiang has not given up on the idea of eradicating the communists. And let's also point out here that the Long March takes Mao and the CCP to the northern corner of China, dangerously close to Manchukuo, a puppet regime set up by Japan after the invasion of Manchuria in 1931. And who knows what Japan is planning for the future? I mean, China is much more abundant in natural resources and fertile lands for the production of food, something the Japanese government and armies really need now that the global market is becoming harder and harder to rely on. So Japan is looking outward. So where is China in 1935? The United Front from before the White Terror is but a historical dream. The communists are hunted, driven from power, and Chiang has not given up on his dream of destroying them. They are holed up in the north, protected by their mobile warfare tactics, hidden beyond the reach of the central government of the Kuomintang. But what will happen if the Japanese ever decide to invade? Will they face two different armies? One of Chinese nationalists under Generalissimo Chiang Kai-Shek, and the other one being Chairman Mao's Communist Red Army, who would still be fighting with each other? And what will the Soviet Union do? They are ideologically connected to the Chinese communists, opposed to the Kuomintang, but also at odds with Japan. One thing is sure though, the chances of a peaceful resolution in the Chinese conflicts are zero. If you would like to find out more about how Japan became increasingly expansionist in the interwar years and how they invaded Manchuria in 1931, you can click here for our episode about that. It'll come up any moment now. Our patron of the week is Carl Ford. Thanks to Carl and people like Carl, we are one step closer in our struggle to revolutionize the world of historical documentaries. Do your part. Join the TimeGhost army at patreon.com or at timeghost.tv. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, every long journey starts with a small step. Hi everybody, Indy here with a TimeGhost public service announcement. What I wanted to say is that over the holiday season, we will not be continuing our regular weekly coverage of Between Two Wars, but we will be doing a series of holiday specials instead, and I'm pretty certain you guys are going to love and leap for joy and tell all your friends about. But Between Two Wars will be back at the beginning of the new year.